So today we're sitting in the Zoli Motorsport built K24 Turbo GT86. This is the car I feel that Toyota should have built, right?
Definitely. They should have teamed up with Honda and not Subaru.
Possibly it was a little bit of a false step, but either way, everyone knows this chassis is an incredibly well-balanced, well-proportioned chassis. Even with the FA20, it still had, the power kind of matched the brakes, kind of
everyone
matched
loved
the
the
suspension.
handling. Like, everyone loved the handling.
But now this car is still a stock K24 A3 engine. What turbos on it?
So it's a G3770, which is a little large, but once we actually got on the dyno and got tuned and found that it spools up on a dime and has plenty of room to grow when he wants to go further into a built engine, DCT or whatever he wants to do. But currently, we're making 200 kPa at about $4,500 and pulling until 7.8, which the K24, the Honda engines love to pull. So just keep going and going and going.
And especially having sort of driven this car, it feels like it just starts to come alive. And we've kind of capped the rev limit at, is it 7,800?
Yeah, 7,800. Just because this is just a junkyard engine. So this is a $1,500 K24.
Yeah, and that's the crazy thing with it. And this car is actually used. What's the package of use for the engine mounts?
K-Power. So K-Power made the mounts, the adapter kit for the factory 86 box.
Yeah.
And then they make a harness, they make a whole kit for it, but we've now chucked the Emtron in it and added the extra sensors that we need to run what we want to run.
And this one, we'll go into it in a bit more detail in some other videos, but there's definitely some reasons why the Emtron was chosen. One is obviously for the chassis integration, but when we move on and go into some more of the motorsport strategies and even just functions to make the car more drivable, it's, as you're learning.
Currently we're sitting here purely off TMF.
Yeah.
It is, it idles like a Corolla.
And TMF is throttle mass flow, and there is so much to it. And even for a seasoned tuner who, has been tuning all their life, coming across to Emtron, you start to learn throttle mass flow is one of those functions which is used in a lot of the new OE cars, and there's a reason for it. And we will definitely delve into that in more detail later, but it's just one of a host of functions that you can use in the Emtron, and the flexibility is just non-stop too. So this car in particular, now it's making 320 kilowatts, there's traction to contend with.
320 kilowatts, 450 newton meters at the wheels.
Yeah, derived from the ECU as well. And
and that was bang on with two separate dynos. So we're pretty happy with that, and I mean, that means that we're able to pull it out a little bit, but in all honesty, at 320 kilowatts in an 86, it hooks up pretty well. Yeah,
I often get asked a lot, how is the ECU actually able to calculate the torque the engine's making? And it is through the air and fuel flow sort of algorithms that sit there, but we can never go into it because it's IP of Emtron. We've spent a lot of years developing it, and it's very handy for traction controls, the number one, and even for this one with a transmission, which, what do you say, good for 400 newton meters?
Yeah, the internet says 400 newton meters. We're currently producing 460, 450, and we pull a bit out of it, and that is through the TMF and through Throttle Effective Area, which we'll go into later. But we're able to restrict basically how much the throttle opens and restrict that torque, and that's done through obviously all those motorsport functions.
And quite an interesting thing we'll get to as well regarding throttle body size, and it's almost a bit of a myth buster, to be honest.
Definitely.
Look, we'll get into that, but look, for now we'll do a bit of an overview of the car, a few drive-bys, I don't know, maybe a traction video or two. We do have to be mindful what we do.
We can't be too silly and can't break any road rules. So we just gotta. It's a beautiful car, beautiful chassis, and it definitely can push some more power than they brought out.
Absolutely. Looking at the engine bay in this, the work that Zoli Motorsports has done is, up there with the best. And I really think that if anyone is looking, in my personal opinion, guys have done LS swaps, Coyote swaps, SR, everything you can imagine. I think the K24, especially looking at it at home in this engine bay, which normally has a big small flat floor. Yeah. It looks so right at home. Temperature, I don't think we've budged. What are we?
Yeah, we're at 89 now, and we were obviously going pretty hard a minute ago, and we've been sitting here idling for 10, 15 minutes. On it down. middle of the day, it sits around there as well.
And we are in
budge.
far north Queensland,
Yeah, we're
and
in far north. It's 30 degrees.
It is absolutely stinging hot. But when you see the actual, movement of air which is allowed, having the radiator sit almost a foot before the actual crank ankle, crank, it's quite, you can actually understand why the thing does stay so cool.
Yeah, I mean, it's a beautiful fit in the bay, and we've worked it out now. Like, it's, there was a few little things we had to work out at the start to get it all to fit, being an east-west engine naturally, but yeah, they definitely should have teamed up with Honda first.
Easy, guys. Well, look, stay tuned for the next one. Right now, we're going to jump into a little bit of tech discussion, probably just sort of taking the top of it without going too deep, but what we want to talk about is basically the drive-by-wire throttle body on this car, and through the Emtron, determining what the throttle effective area is.
Yeah, that's right.
So, Mitch, you've just had a pretty heavy crash course on it, and I'm going to throw the microphone over to you.
My way. So, basically, using a pressure sensor on the boost pipe pre-throttle, the normal intake air tank, when you have a map on your manifold like you normally would, you can basically calibrate in throttle effective area given on a given TPS or throttle position. So that way then you can correlate your foot on the pedal to demand a throttle effective area instead of a TPS position. So vastly different to just the old-fashioned cable where you move at 50% and the throttle moves 50%. So, 50% might not be 50% flow. It isn't 50% flow. It's, vastly more than that.
Yeah, and that's, I think, where a lot of people get quite, it's difficult when you say throttle effective area. A lot of guys are like, well, what does that mean? And we've always looked at, traditionally because of older ECU systems or cars we played on when we were younger, and we'd look at throttle, basically throttle position as a percentage. So we either had it open 10%, 20%, all the way through to 100. And it didn't necessarily correlate to that's how much airflow was moving across that throttle blade.
Yeah, like the Emtron, once you start dialing in that effective area, you start to see the table, and you'll see that at the start it ramps up quite quick, like you've got a bit of control. And then after, like in this scenario, I think after about 55%, angle on the actual throttle blade, that's it. You don't actually achieve much more area and flow through the throttle after that. So the table just kind of goes up and then just flattens off. So this 60mm throttle that's out of the factory 86, naturally aspirated 86, is, it's effectively too big for 320 kilo.
Yeah, and a little bit of a myth buster too, like where, I definitely grew up with a lot of Nissans, and SR20s, we used to put bigger throttle bodies, things like that. I'm always thinking, we're doing it because it's a restriction, things like that. And really, now that we have the data, we have an ECU to calculate that through the differential pressures with the pre and post throttle body pressure sensor, we can actually see that a bit of that was a myth. We were probably getting a bit carried away.
Yeah, that's right.
In Australia, we used to use the old XF throttle bodies as well, which was always a thing. But so look, this one as well. So we're talking the throttle effective area. This car's got a factory GD86 transmission, which is basically around the 400 newton meters is where
it's limit,
So we cap torque on this engine, and do you want to explain how you actually did that?
Basically, we figured out what kind of torque it's going to make with a certain amount of air mass.
And how did you figure that
out? So there's a long-winded, kind of explanation for that. But in this, at a higher level, you're kind of just calibrating that, with the boost pressure sensor on the front of the throttle plate and your map sensor, you can then calculate the differential pressure through.
People often ask the question, and basically it's quite a complex fuel and airflow algorithm that ECU does generate. And in that as well, obviously there's frictional losses we take into, you have to validate the table with your frictional losses.
Yeah, but that's for your torque table, but I mean, as far as air mass goes, that would be a calculation that's probably, air mass should be in every ECU if you've got a VE. So, I mean, the calculation is there in the background, and Emtron's one of the, well, as far as I know, the only ECU where you can access that runtime and you can see how much air mass is actually going through the engine. You can split it into each cylinder. So then you can use that and fest it through everything that you do. So we worked out that, you know, we needed X amount, which is around the 350 mark of grams a second of air, right? So just keep things simple, to create the torque that we wanted, right? So then we were able to cap the throttle position moving to a certain area to cap that amount of air flowing through the engine. So if you drive the car and you put your foot flat, the dash is actually reading TPS angle.
Yeah.
It'll say 46% with your foot flat.
Yeah. Yeah, interesting. And so, you know, the customer's like, hang on, there's a lot more left on the table. Where in reality, we're doing all we want to do to keep the engine alive. And obviously that sort of calculation that does exist there is sort of permeated through the car's torque modelling for traction control and everything through there.
It was pretty impressive. Like, obviously, you know, this week going through, it's pretty substantial, you know, training on for the last 5 days of all this and what you could do with that air mass, and, you know, collating it to lambda and collating it to Jess. It's unbelievable.
A very interesting fact here is Mitch is actually an aircraft engineer, so a lot of these concepts, which was quite funny, like things that you've learned through your engineering sort of
air mass is pretty
training
relative to what I do.
Yeah, so it translates into an aftermarket engine management, and you actually grasped onto it quite quickly and started running and sort of taking your own path.
Well, yeah, I mean, like, obviously the normal route is to go, you know, manifold pressure over, you know, RPM and whatnot, and to me it just makes sense to do air mass because manifold pressure is only one part of the equation. So to me, you know, air mass was air and fuel is what makes it run, right?
Yeah.
So let's just work off that. It makes a lot more sense. And when you can do it, and you can do it accurately, you know, we were looking on the logs, seeing 2.9% that we needed to pull out.
Yeah.
Pulled out 2.9%. Boom, we have the exact figures we want at the end. Like
it's dead on.
Yeah, it's dead on.
Yeah, so look, that's a bit of a long-winded one. We want to sort of crack into it. It's very difficult to sort of
To break it down a bit
over on the
smaller,
subjects, but look, definitely we want to move on to more Emtron training too. And if guys are interested in it, definitely download the Mtune software, www.emtron.world. And look, definitely a lot to learn, and will certainly open your eyes up to what's possible. You guys might be using different systems, and if you ever feel like you want to sort of stretch your legs a little bit, I think the Emtron is the platform for you.
Yeah, definitely.
Thanks, guys.